Good morning. It's good to see you again today. Hope you're well. I was thinking about a subject that I don't really talk about much in church these days. It's not a problem for us, but it was a problem for the early church. The whole of the Old Testament and even the Gospels is mainly focused on God's relationship with his chosen people, the Jews, the descendants, the physical descendants of Abraham. Abraham, the father of faith in the Old Testament, and it follows his children and his grandchildren and the descendants, and then the 12 sons of Jacob or Israel, and how they went into Egypt and all the story about how God looked after them and brought them. It was all about the people of God. And in amongst all of that was the promise, hidden in plain sight, really, that God's intention was that his people should testify about him to the world so that all would come to faith. And it's in almost every prophet, and it's also in the announcement, the prophecy made by Simeon in Luke 2, where he says, mine eyes have seen, that's verse 30, mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to thy people Israel. Now the word Gentiles there is used of all people who are not Jews, who are not physical descendants of Abraham. And Simeon, this elderly man who had been promised he would see the Messiah, held the baby Jesus in his arms and said those words. And they echo things that are in the Old Testament prophets all over the place, that God was seeking to reveal his truth and his life and his salvation to all men and women, not just to the descendants of Abraham. And it caused a lot of problems in Acts of the Apostles when Gentiles began to hear about Jesus and joined the church, and there was a controversy about whether the non-Jew should have to become a Jew first before he could be a follower of Jesus, and would have to embrace the mark of Judaism, which is circumcision. And there were people who argued that you couldn't be a Christian if you weren't a Jew first, and if you were not an observer of the law of Moses. Now, we understand from Paul's teaching and the teaching of Jesus that it's not by what we do that we are saved. It is by faith in what Jesus did for us. The doing the right thing and following after him and living according to God's ways is a result of being saved, not in order to be saved. And we understand that. But there's a lot in the New Testament about the relationship between Jews and Gentiles and how God has broken down that what was an enormous historical barrier between Jew and non-Jew that still exists today in many parts of the world. And a lot of the argument in Romans is about, is there a difference between the Jew and the Gentile? Do the Jews have an advantage? Are they still God's chosen people? And are Christians a very low down second best? And we were yesterday in our own church fellowship at Monk's Yard talking about Rahab, the harlot, who hid the spies in Joshua's day, Joshua chapter 2 and chapter 6. You can find the story there if you want to read it. But she was a citizen of Jericho. She was a non-Jew. And she hid the spies that came from the people of God to spy out Jericho. She hid them. And as a result of her faith expressed in that act, which put her life in danger, she and her whole family were saved, and she became part of the Jewish nation. And she is included in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel as the mother of Boaz, a non-Jew in the lineage of Jesus. And we were thinking about how wonderful God was in including and showing the way, really, including a foreign woman. And then, of course, Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, was also a non-Jew, and she was the father of Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David, in the lineage of Jesus. And how God made sure that these two women who were outcasts, Rahab because of her past as a harlot and her nationality, and Ruth because of her nationality, were not Jews. They were women of faith who joined the Jewish nation and became part of the lineage of the Lord Jesus. It's all there in the Old Testament. The fact that God had to find a way to reveal his truth to the world, and he did it through a particular group of people. And Paul says in Romans 3, verse 29, "Is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also, since God is one, and he will justify the circumcised on the ground of their faith, and the uncircumcised through their faith." So the circumcised is the Jew. The Jew is a person, if he is a person of faith, he's justified by his faith, not by the fact of him being a Jew. And the non-Jew, the Gentile, is justified by faith and is not denied a part in the gospel because he's not circumcised. He is a person of faith. And Paul argues it in Romans that Abraham was a person of faith before he was circumcised. So he is the father of all people who have faith. So if you are a non-Jew or if you're a Jew, the only way to be saved is believing by faith in what Jesus did for us. There's a wonderful equalizing of the death of Jesus, that the way to God is through Jesus. He said, "I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." There we are. That's a lot to think about today. God bless you. Have a great day. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.